Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Election preparations underway. Voter registration opens. Call for urgent lifeguard service reforms. Election watchdog begins monitoring campaign conduct. And internationally, Trump moves to dismantle U.S. Education Department. Now for the details. Just 48 hours after Prime Minister Stuart Young announced April 28th as Election Day, voter registration begins today, March 20th. Citizens have 9 days to update their registration details, including changes in constituency or first-time voter registration. Legal notices from President Christine Kangaloo have set the preliminary list of electors, while the Elections and Boundaries Commission has confirmed that electoral registration will be conducted in all 41 constituencies. The EBC urges the public to check their registration details online and ensure their information is up to date before the March 28th deadline. Two tourists, Sarah Persson of Sweden and Canadian Anna Hospitalis, are calling for immediate improvements to lifeguard services in Trinidad and Tobago after witnessing a delayed response to a drowning incident at Pigeon Point Beach. Person trained in CPR said lifeguards showed little urgency and lacked proper training. She and Hospitalis stepped in to assist, ultimately saving the life of pilot Kristen Battersby. The Tobago House of Assembly has since commended them, while a lifeguard representative insists the responders followed protocol. With the general election set for April 28th, the Council for Responsible Political Behavior has begun monitoring political parties and candidates for ethical conduct. The Council urges the public to report campaign violations via WhatsApp or email, ensuring transparency and accountability. Weekly reports will be issued to keep the public informed. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to sign an executive order aimed at dismantling the Department of Education. The move, which aligns with his campaign promises, faces legal challenges and requires congressional approval. Trump argues the department promotes woke ideologies, while critics warn that shutting it down would harm students, particularly those from low-income backgrounds. The order also includes major staff cuts, with thousands set to be laid off. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi McNish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title, it's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
WESN.
I do wonder to what extent alcohol is maybe too important to our society. But it's a strange thing, because when you look at many other nations around the world, they'll have their alcohol, their drink, whether if it's beer, mead, scotch, tequila, wine, rum. Of course, we in the Caribbean, rum is the stereotypical alcohol associated with us. The Minister of Health, or the Ministry of Health, has revealed information that suggests that more ladies are drinking. Alcohol consumption is on the rise. We got something similar, I believe, last year, and the minister, the headline is that he's concerned about the spike in female usage. I'm not necessarily thinking that it's a gender-specific problem, but rather, similar to the last time we heard the Ministry of Health speak on this topic in general, to what extent are we over-reliant on alcohol as a stress reliever? I do wonder if there is similar statistics for cigarettes. Now, to some extent, the comparison is with 2011. And you have to wonder, you know, how accurate is it? Is it per person, per capita? They're saying things like a percentage of the population consumed alcohol in the last 30 days. I'm not entirely sure really how good of a metric this is, but let's just go with it, right? Is this an ongoing sign that people need to be a bit more distracted? Could it be an ongoing sign that, well, first of all, we just had Carnival, so obviously a lot of the population have just had a drink in the last 30 days or so. And to some extent, Carnival no longer ends at Ash Wednesday. I believe they have fetes the following weekend. The fete culture might just now be literally 12 months out of the year. They don't take breaks for Christmas. They don't take breaks for Easter or Lent, much less any other time of the year, any other religious holiday. So perhaps it's an expansion of one of the few industries, I guess you could say, that no matter what is thriving. If the fetting industry and the alcohol industry starts to be on the decline in TNT, that might be like the last major indicator before we might be in some serious economic trouble. But dare I ask, is this one of the first indicators with regards to things like psychological trouble? Are we too stressed? Given what's been going on in the country, I won't necessarily fault people for feeling stressed. Now, one of the interesting things that's coming out of this unique situation in the PNM and the government is to what extent is Dr. Keith Rowley still involved? That's to put it politely. And essentially, the Prime Minister is saying, hold on, I'm not having anyone backseat drive my decisions, I'm making the decisions. Now, this is one of those things where the Prime Minister is not the political leader. The political leader is still Dr. Keith Rowley. And Dr. Keith Rowley still, to some extent, one could argue, is a respected political figure, unlike many of his predecessors who were voted out of office and then kicked out of political leadership, essentially, or they died in office. So this is a unique situation where I don't even know if we know how to properly judge it. It's not as though Prime Minister Young is looking at a predecessor in both the executive leadership role and the political leadership role, and somehow there's informal tendrils. There is actually still, to some capacity, formal authority over some aspects of the situation. But I think part of it is why I'm not necessarily concerned about any claims that maybe Stuart Young is a puppet and Dr. Keith Rowley is the puppet master, able to wield power from behind the scenes. It all comes back down to what extent do you honestly believe he wanted to retire or not? And I think he did. So it would be counterproductive to him to have to keep holding Stuart Young's hand, as one headline says, that he's not. And it just won't be practical unless we start to see Dr. Keith Rowley in cabinet meetings and the like. Now, maybe Prime Minister Young is asking his predecessor for advice. Won't be the first time. This is one of those things where, as a young nation, we're going to hit milestones of different weird, unexpected, unlikely scenarios that will still occur every now and then, or once in a while, or at least once. We just have to get to it. Will we be able to accurately judge it for what it is? I don't know. The thing is, fortunately, because the election is so close, it's not that necessary to have to be bothered by this situation, because one would hope they would resolve it as soon as possible to bring it more in line with conventional wisdom, because that's just more practical. Of course, one of the observations coming out of this situation where Stuart Young has to say, my hand is not being held by Dr. Keith Rowley, is to what extent will that cause a negative perception for the election, because the political leader is usually present. This is the thing. It's one thing to be prime minister because your predecessor steps down, he wants to retire, he doesn't want to hold that post anymore. It's another thing to have to lead an election when technically your predecessor is still the political leader. And I think that part of it, which of course is unprecedented, yet the precedent has yet to be set because we are going through the election now. How will that function? How will the public perceive it? What will that look like? We don't know. It might be much ado about nothing, or it might be a critical factor in this election that could sink the PNM's chances. Who knows? It all depends to some extent on voter perception. But speaking about perception, we have gotten further communications from the Prime Minister over the bullying situation, where he has issued an apology, but this apology is, to some extent, a general apology to all those who are bullied. And he's not necessarily speaking to the situation specifically. And now we've come up to a point where it's very unfortunate and inconvenient to, I would imagine, most of us who want to see a resolution to the situation, because as much as you don't want to blame the victim or dismiss anyone's claims that they were victimized, I don't think we have enough to substantiate anything in any practical way. We could believe what we want to believe, but I've already heard enough of a different account to have enough of a question to say, well, I need to know more before I would be comfortable giving a final opinion on this situation. And it's not because I want to defend the Prime Minister, but rather, it goes back to what I keep saying, the standard is innocent until proven guilty. Not innocent until, presumed guilty, or innocent until the public opinion says you're guilty. Because there is a scenario where the Prime Minister was one of many and just happened to be the target of retaliation, which may or may not be mainly responsible for his actions. I don't know. I'm not saying that the Prime Minister is innocent, but I can't say that he's guilty either. So I'm left in a place that I don't like, which is I don't get a resolution, but I can't breach fairness in order to push for an outcome. Unfortunately, by default, we end up with a lack of resolution, a lack of an outcome. But it would be hypocritical of me, and it would be biased of me, to continue on this topic as though I were trying to attack the Prime Minister. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be a politician that I'm indifferent to, that I like, that I hate. The standard is the standard. This is one of the reasons why I don't like accounts, because you see this in the entertainment industry, particularly in Southeast Asia. Claims years after the fact come out, and in some cases are proven to be untrue. But even then, it's not really proven to be true or untrue. You just get somebody else coming with a counterclaim You know, you're trying to get people to remember events that may have happened 10 years or more ago. Individual anecdotal accounts that generally either speak to one or two specific incidences and not very clearly, or an overall situation in very vague and general terms. What tends to happen is these sorts of accusations are rarely meant to play out in the courts of public opinion. And this is where the whole situation is unfortunate. Because depending on the courts of public opinion and what they want to accept or not, the Prime Minister might have to take some lumps, if not be outright vilified, whether now or eventually for this. Is that fair? Technically, it's not, because we don't actually know the specific details of what happened, and it's been so long ago that I don't know if anybody is a reliable narrator in this circumstance. And therein lies the problem. But the flip side is, I don't think anybody has any reasonable concrete defense of the situation to clear the Prime Minister. Therein lies his problem. So at best, he could do what he has done. And I do think that with regards to a public relations message, it's not bad. But it doesn't directly speak to the situation, except to say something similar to what I've been saying. He doesn't want to rehash into these things, and it's unclear, and it happened however many years ago. Things to that effect, which it might be to some extent acceptable as a public relations message, but as a resolution, it's not really a resolution. So now the question is, going into this election, how will the public judge him for this? I don't think it's right to condemn him for it, but I still have questions, and those questions make me feel uneasy. For the rest of you, if you want to condemn him for it, I couldn't necessarily, I don't have a defense for him to present to you as a counter-argument for argument's sake, so it is what it is. This is something that I guess he and his team will just have to manage, and we'll see where the chips fall. My only stake in this race is the fact that I dislike, if not outright hate, situations like this where we can't get a resolution and we are left with questions. And to what extent are those questions even pertinent? Now we get into situations where, well, will bullies always be bullies? Are we saying Stuart Young has always been a bully? The implications on reformation, etc., and rehabilitation and all of that. Questions about statutes of limitations. These things are not as simple when you get to this level, when you bring this sort of conversation to a national level like this. But the thing is, unfortunately, to be an effective leader, one of the things that you have to have is, as much as possible, the respect of the people you're supposed to lead. So I guess that's one of the reasons, or the main reason why I don't like when things are unresolved like this and there's no, well, at least for those of us on the outside looking in, I would say we don't even necessarily have a good place to continue the conversation, to try to present possible ways to resolve this. So we're just left hanging with questions that might seem not so important to some, very important to others, but I would argue the importance of it, we might not all really identify why these things are as important as they are. Caught up in the emotional response of, oh my gosh, how could he? No, this leads into wider questions about how can we? Of course, just to mention, the Prime Minister, who is also still the Minister of Energy, he is saying that efforts are being made to try to preserve the Dragon deal. I don't know how successful it's going to be, and this is one of those things where, listen, I'm not going to knock it. As much as we complain about too many eggs in the energy basket, And despite the fact that they try to convince us, well, it's not all, it's too many eggs in the energy basket in general. All of those industries are connected, and they have similar vulnerabilities. It wasn't all in the dragon basket, but enough of them were. The whole need to control the narrative with a positive spin now, to some extent, makes the government saying, we're going to try and save the dragon deal. Well, it's hard to be confident in statements on this topic because you didn't necessarily do a great job communicating your position and the situation on the topic before it reached this point. And to some extent, while you didn't necessarily outright lie, you didn't make any absolutist statements, your position has proven to be somewhat incorrect, maybe, dare I say, naive, if we want to be in the strict sense of the word, because you tried to say there was nothing to see here, we're not worried about Trump, and now we're talking about, well, we're going to try and save the deal. Maybe if someone was worried about Trump, some people, and what it might mean to the dragon deal, maybe efforts could have been done. Part of it is your public communication to your population is part of those efforts. So even if you had stuff behind the scenes that you didn't want to reveal, that were contrary to your public messaging, people still watch what's out there in the public space, including the stakeholders that you may or may not be trying to negotiate with. There's a new strategic service agency director, which I think to some extent is tied to the previous situation. Former head of the special branch, Arthur Barrington, he is going to be appointed the head on April the 1st. This will allow retired Brigadier General Anthony Philip Spencer to return as ambassador for TNT in Washington, which probably is sorely needed, unless he would have to be replaced permanently, but I don't know. Right now, General Philip Spencer probably has those relationships to try to get this dragon deal as quickly as possible. You don't want to send a new ambassador and he has to start from scratch. Maybe not entirely from scratch, but you understand what I mean. So I did wonder to what extent pulling him, the timing of this SSA situation and pulling our ambassador to come and try and deal with it, it did mean that he wasn't going to be in Washington. And maybe we were taking certain things for granted. I don't know. To what extent was it necessary? And now in hindsight, was that the best decision? That probably is subjective, to be fair. Last but not least, Rushton Paris is wishing his former colleagues who have left the UNC well, but he will not be severing ties with the UNC. And all I have to say about that is, I see what you're doing there, Rushton Paris. I see what you're doing there. All right, let's see how this works out. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into some of the daily review. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WS, and we'll be right back after this.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title. It's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
All right, to get through a few stories. The first one, and to some extent, the initial part about it might not be the most earth-shattering for you, but there's some implications as we continue, because I'm looking at multiple stories put into one because they kind of speak to a similar underbelly. First off, the Prime Minister has basically announced that he has invited 2 more sets of observers, these ones international, one from the Commonwealth Secretary General, as well as one from the Carter Center in the United States, formed in part by former President Jimmy Carter, is it, I believe? So we will essentially have 3 sets of observers, this to some extent, and at least one of them from the Commonwealth. That would have been potentially done before the latest rounds of demands from the UNC, potentially kind of heading them off from the past. It now actually makes me wonder to what extent will this argument continue by the UNC. They've made a demand. I assume they did not necessarily expect Prime Minister Young to meet said demand because CARICOM observers for them were not enough. They wanted international observers. So he has taken the opportunity to invite not 1 but 2 entities in order to do so. 2 entities who I believe to some extent, at least with the Carter Center, has done this sort of work before, and I do believe around the world. Part of the Carter Center's, I guess you could say, mission statement or objective is to promote democracy. Hence, why one would argue they would be pertinent. Now, of course, there is a very, very minor angle where the opposition leader could potentially complain that the Carter Center was formed by a former Democratic president, and we see where, to some extent, the political parties might be trying to differentiate themselves by adopting ideological concepts from the Republicans and Democrats, but I won't necessarily say any more on that, right? One would imagine that the opposition leader should just say with grace that now that we have these observers, everything should be fine, and I'm interested to see if she's going to try and find a way to continue pushing this issue, because in other situations, that tends to be what the opposition does. They will find an excuse to continue to make something an issue. Not always, but it's things like that that distracts viewers, listeners, the public from the good points that they actually make and the good issues that they actually have to speak on, because one of the things with regards to this is to what extent does this message kind of throws a sideways comment at CARICOM. Gary Griffith has pointed out the fact that to him, why are we going to continue in CARICOM if it seems we don't trust CARICOM observers to help ensure that there is an objective third party, not political, but the literal traditional meaning of the word, to, give an objective account on how the elections have gone down. To what extent is this an unintended, I would imagine, or hope, slap in CARICOM's face? It's an interesting point. I don't necessarily think that was the opposition's objective, but at the same time, when you deal with international relations, one must technically think of all these things, not what you intend, but how you will be perceived, no matter how small, because at times, with regards to international relations, the subtle hints sometimes are the biggest, loudest messages that some countries will take to heart, or some international organizations will take to heart. But there's the whole other aspect. I understand, okay, are we doubting CARICOM observers? But what about the EBC? One of the things that I find somewhat interesting is basically, to some degree, people who see themselves in a disadvantaged position, and potentially when it's determined that someone loses the election, the loser might have complaints about unfair situations, illegal situations going on. But ironically, in a country where we basically reasonably assume that there's widespread corruption throughout all levels, in the political environment, in the public service, and of course, it's the private sector participates. To what extent, of course, we don't know who is guilty of what and the specific details, who might be clean. We don't necessarily know. We just have a generalization in our minds of sweet TNT and the overall term corruption. And usually, because there will be drips and dribbles to indicate thus to us, right? Or we see something happen here and something happen there. Maybe we don't get names, or maybe there are some examples, which don't necessarily give us a conclusion and a definite concluding, how to put it, boy? It won't give us a definite accusation, but it will leave us with questions like Section 34. I mean, look, both airports, one could argue, if you dig deep enough, you'll have some questions on where the money went. But the EBC really doesn't have those sort of Damocles hanging over their head situations. In fact, I remember for the last HA election, everybody assumed, oh, this will favor the PNM. This will favor the PNM. I mean, maybe it was meant to favor the PNM. Who knows? We just know the result. The result definitely did not favor the PNM. So to some extent, I can't then go and continue the argument, oh, well, the EBC definitely favored the PNM in the THA elections. Definitely. I mean, you could still try to make that argument, but because the results were so decisive, I think that those accusations that came out before the election, they lost all momentum. And now, to what extent do we think that the EBC is going to play funny business with the general election? We already saw what happened with regards to one seat in the local government election, and I don't know what to tell you. Because to some extent, if we keep blaming our own people for what they may or may not be doing, right? How is it then that we could move forward? It's one thing if we have evidence and we could prosecute a specific case. It's another thing when we just throw out accusations because we don't like the results. I get it. We assume that there's corruption. That's basically where we've reached. That's what this tells me. Oh my gosh, well, there's corruption everywhere, so there's corruption here. But it's very difficult to move forward because to some extent you're going to demotivate the people involved, and if we're not careful, eventually the only people who's going to apply for jobs to the EBC are the corrupt because they don't care about being falsely accused of corruption because they intend to do it anyway. Right now, the EBC, they are seeing a surge in visitors. That's how it was reported. Essentially, members of the public looking to the EBC to kind of check on their registration status, maybe update it, because this was a surprise to the public. All of these political analysts saying they knew. Okay, right, that's nice. I don't know if anybody actually said publicly the date of April the 28th before the Prime Minister said the date of April 28th. But I guess nobody knew for certain. But now the EBC, they have extended their working hours. They are open on the weekends to try to facilitate all of the members of the public who have stuff to get done. They also advise that you can check your registration status online. With that said, we wanna trust local and divest ourselves from the foreigners. But push come to shove, this is one of those things, right? I don't want to divest ourselves from foreign help, like the Privy Council. And I want more foreign help for certain things like anti-crime measures. I'm not trying to say that, but the implied lack of respect for our own operations and the people who conduct them, I can't say that I like it, that it's an assumption. Now, the last thing on this that I just wanted to mention in the tail end, there is an independent organization called the Council for Responsible Political Behavior. They have begun monitoring political activities to the lead up to the election. And I believe it's the deputy UNC chairman, Davindranath Thakur, he's complaining that this body, the Council for Responsible Political Behavior, which the UNC has withdrew from, has no legal authority over its affairs and should refrain from any commentary about its conduct. Any reference to the party could mislead voters and unfairly influence the upcoming election. Well, any public statement from an observer, an analyst, or a commentator can do that. It's the nature of the game. You would have to then go into the realm of, was it an ethical, reasonable statement or not, rather than just saying, well, all statements do that. Because then by that measure, you could just tell the entire media landscape that we need to shut up. But then that bumps into freedom of the press, right? Is it because they're not press? They are commentators, essentially. They're independent, I guess you could say NGO. Maybe I'm wrong. More on that in a bit. The council is not, the UNC further argues the council is not a statutory official body, has no legal authority over a party, warns that any statements from the council referring to the UNC could be interpreted by the public as an official or quasi-official statement regarding the party's electoral conduct may influence voter behavior accordingly, would be misleading, and would amount to election interference. So for those things to kind of hold water, the implication would be that they're acting in bad faith, therefore they're a puppet for the PNM maybe. Right? Because you're saying, oh, well, why, it's going to sound official. I don't know how they're going to, official in what way? Like if it's a government body? Because here's why. Not too long ago, I believe it was in the 2020 elections, then Prime Minister Dr. Rowley basically strongly criticized this situation. Dr. Rowley said, an ethical council without ethics is steeped in bias is to be ignored for what it is. So, if the PNM, at least in the past, said that this is a biased body that should be ignored, and the UNC is saying, well, they have no legal authority and might influence voters, I think that they're probably friends of neither, and thus I am quite interested in what they have to say. Because at least with regards to the dynamics of our two-party system, we'll see if anyone else could break through into Parliament. I guess if both sides hate you, those of us in the general public who are not staunch supporters of either party could then look at that and say, hey, maybe they're objective with what they have to say. Last thing I just want to point out really quick. There was 3 police killings in 2 incidents. I heard of one from someone who was basically right there. It happened near or outside where they were living. It's one of those situations where the police claim to have been shot at, so they returned fire, end up, I think, hitting 3, killing 2 in the first instance, and then there was another instance, I assume, where a 3rd person outright died. At least 1 person in that first incident apparently was reported to have been injured, and another suspect may have gotten away. It has left people who knew one of the deceased in a bit of emotional turmoil, understandably so, as they try to come to terms with the situation. And of course, it leaves us with questions. Some would not necessarily want to believe that he was involved in crime. Some maybe might accept it. But herein lies the real rub. PCA Director David West has pointed out to the fact that there is been a significant increase in shootings and in, well, the subsequent, some of those shootings leading to death. We're talking, compared to 6 incidents of police-involved shootings around this time last year, there are, this year, 15. Leaving 21 people dead this year compared to 9 dead last year. And we're talking the period of January 1st to March the 24th of last year compared to January 1st to March the 19th of this year. And I think one of the main criticisms of this situation is the fact that Mr. West said they don't have body camera footage. And it leads to the question, why is there no body camera footage? Now, just to be brief, in defending of this situation, Gideon Dixon, the Police Welfare Association president, he has pointed out, well, no one's asking about how many cops have been shot, how many cops have been injured, and the like. And also, let's go to the Commissioner of Police. I believe between him and Mr. Dixon, they're pointing to the fact that, look, we have heightened operations that's going to potentially lead to more confrontations with criminals, right? Because of the SOE, because of crime-fighting efforts. That's fair. That is fair. With regards, but that speaks to the surge in the numbers, the increase in the numbers. It doesn't speak to the situation with the body cameras. And I would have thought that they would have had some explanation for that. I do think there was maybe one situation where the police claimed that they had body camera footage. So I'm not too sure if Mr. West's accusations that there is no body camera footage for these shooting incidents is 100% true. Maybe in one case it's not true. But I couldn't find that story. Maybe I just didn't have the time this morning. But with regards to the defense of the body camera or the lack of body camera footage, I didn't find any, and I'm disappointed that there is none, because that's the thing. The increase, yes, statistics, you know, that could be manipulated, interpreted in different ways depending on your biases, perceptions, etc., etc. But saying that, oh, the thing that's supposed to allow for transparency and can be used to clear officers of wrongdoing, yeah, we still haven't instituted that yet. I don't know if it's because the now acting Commissioner, Junior Benjamin, is still stuck on encouraging his officers to follow the departmental order, as opposed to, I don't know, ordering them and properly disciplining them thoroughly when they don't follow the departmental order. But I do feel we've reached the point now where maybe there needs to be some kind of penalty for when officers are involved in shootings, they don't have a camera, somebody ends up dead, which could also be another officer. It doesn't have to be a suspect that ends up dead. It could be an officer, it could be a member of the public, whoever. And unless they have one hell of an ironclad reason for not having a body camera on at that moment, they're going to face some sort of penalty. Now, with that said, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll switch gears a little bit on the conversation. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the chiefs to lose so? Why you want the chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
Let's go to the last part.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
And we're back on Talking Point on WSND Content Capital Show. Michael Small here, joined by a familiar face, but we haven't seen him in a while. Second time for the new year, of course, on Talking Point. You've been seeing him on Breakthrough every Monday on WSN. I'm speaking, of course, of Mark Anthony Peter, our arts and culture commentator, who also sometimes moonlights as a bit of a youth commentator here on Talking Point. Mark, welcome back.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, Troy and Tobago. Thank you. Yes, who also sometimes.
Who also some. So one of the things, of course, with this election is I find in TNT, we don't have the same level of engagement by young people in politics. You know, you see it in the States and in Europe and maybe even in China, right? And Japan, South Korea. Students, they go to college, they learn about stuff, they start to get passionate about things. Meanwhile, in TNT, students see stuff online and get passionate about issues internationally, not necessarily issues here. So now we have an election call. From your perspective, from the perspective of maybe people you've spoken to, how is it have young people, many of whom, because college students, I believe, should be eligible to vote, or at least graduates should be eligible to vote and should start to have enough knowledge and critical thinking capacity to determine to vote. What are you hearing from them, their response, their intentions with this election?
Well, it's interesting that excuse me. It's interesting that that's where we're going, because an article came out in the news recently where they interviewed people across generational spectrums, and there were two particular young people. One person, he said, you know, he's just very disillusioned with everything that's happening, and you know, it feels like a sense of, and I think one thing all most citizens can agree on is that when people are voted into power, we don't see or feel the rewards. When I say the rewards, the things that they're actually supposed to fix. All right, they promise to lower the crime rate, and yet the death toll raises tremendously. They promise to, I don't know, possibly fix cost of help with the cost of living, and yet things are people don't feel that. So there's a little bit of a disillusionment, and we need to keep in mind people in my generation, slightly older, maybe slightly younger, you know, we are the generation that, yes, it feels great to be able to do something, but we need but we need to see the rewards of it. We need to see the results of it, is what I should say. So if it feels like somebody is voted into power and all of these promises are made and these promises are not kept, then that breeds mistrust. And this is a conversation that you and I have had on Talking Point before, where there's a level of mistrust. Now, granted, keep in mind the generational experience is different, right? Those of us who are born into this, and I'll say this sort of privilege, to be able to vote, all of those things that we did not have to deal with a lot of the things of older generations. It's not that we're tunnel visioned on purpose. It's a matter of, this is what you promise, okay, follow up on it. Whereas older generations may have a different perspective on some of those things. But I will say for me, it always feels like a back and forth. It always feels like we're going into it. It's like I'll make a musical analysis. It almost feels like a musical arrangement that's going nowhere. It's just going in circles and going in circles all of the time, and it feels like we are not. It feels like there's no follow through, and I'll use another word. It feels like there's no accountability. I feel like the politicians and political parties are not being accountable for what they promise to set out.
Here's an interesting thought, because for young people, the perception of progress might be harder because, you know, you've witnessed literally a shorter period in time. But to some degree, I mean, it's not like you're fresh out of college at 22. So to your perception, does it seem like at times there's a lack of progress? It's like we're going nowhere fast. What we have, a lot of it is because we had it from long before. You know, it's somewhat old. I mean, the flyover to San Fernando is relatively new to me, but it's not quite as new to you, and it's not quite that new anymore. And it was a wider project that has not really been completed, and that's just one example.
Right. So if you could just sort of clarify what the question is.
Yeah, do you see maybe or perceive that there's a lack of progress? Like society is kind of just stuck. You know, we had gates, it wasn't implemented well, but now we even had to kind of roll back on that, and we're not even really seeing society progress because of gate, among other initiatives.
Okay, yeah. So it does feel like there's no progress, but there's little progress, and I think part of the problem maybe, and I will say maybe there is some sort of level of progress that's happening that we're not seeing, but again that's a problem, because if we're not seeing the results of what we voted for, if we're not seeing the promises being kept, if it's not being explained to us well, right, then it becomes a little bit difficult to really feel like something is happening. Now, granted, also on the flip side, I would say, and I think you could probably add to this in terms of communications, like communications to the people from the government side. I can imagine that would be a very hard job, and let me tell you why. Because if I am in my sphere, in my world, if I am hosting an event, or if I am putting out some work or producing a song, releasing a song or whatever, there is a certain niche that I would go to, that I know would see it, that I know would want to see it, and any sort of extra people that want to see that sort of whose attention it grabs, that's fine. But when you have to do communications on the government side, you have to communicate to everybody, and I think that can be a very difficult job, just because everybody, regardless of which region of the countries of the Twin Island they live in, which region of what their experiences are, or what their biases are, then that can be a very, very difficult thing to manage. However, that is your actual job, right? So, and we need to be able to hold them accountable. The problem is I don't know how to hold my government accountable, because my experience has been the adults, they vote, They don't tell each other who they vote for, and then at the family lines they just argue senselessly, and there's no sort of meeting.
I think.
And you all just witnessed, etc.
Okay, we lost you for a second there, but I think we generally got the gist of what you were saying there. That,
right.
I mean, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, I was basically saying there's no follow through. There's no follow through on
from the older generation and the younger generation.
From the older generation.
Yeah.
This is what we just spoke about, etc., etc. You know.
That's a good point. The younger generation doesn't always know how to seek redress, in part because we don't have great examples of it, or I would maybe consider that our general public, the voter base, they became less and less engaged. So as generations, turn over, basically, the knowledge of what to do becomes less and less apparent or ingrained in our society. We lose it to some extent. But yes, communication is hard, and it's not just for the government, and people might say, don't defend the government, but I see this all the time, not just with the government, but with regards to the public service, when the police have messaging, and some of the things is, don't do this because it's a scam, and people still fall for the scam, right? We're not talking about the police are trying to make themselves look good. These are proper public service messages that doesn't get out there. The private sector, I mean, you're just one aspect of the private sector, but the private sector has issues with advertising and reaching out to the wider population, or in many ways disseminating information for services like, online banking, or what to do if there's, or what requirements might change if you want to get this service or that service. We don't even talk about selling anything. We're just talking about, again, disseminating important information. It seems to be really hard in TNT. I don't know about any other country. I just noticed that across the board, our channels of information dissemination just do not seem to be effective whatsoever, because it leads me to another point, something that you mentioned yesterday. It's something that I wanted to talk about. The engagement of our younger generations with regards to news outlets. Yes, media houses are trying to put news on social media, but you don't have anywhere near the same level of detail and context as written articles. And even then, you were complaining that how the articles are written, there seems to be a barrier to entry for young people. So we want young people to be more involved, but if they are not aware of the issues and they don't understand the issues properly, pushing them to be more involved might be counterproductive for everybody. So, I mean, do you have any concerns that, yes, you have a young person there and they're trying to follow what's going on and they can't make heads or tails of it, so they'll just give up because they don't know?
Yeah. So, just to sort of expand on what you're speaking about. So my experience has been, so there was the whole thing about and again, I still don't know the full context of it, but there's this story about a situation about bullying when Stuart Young was in school. And I saw the article. I saw a few of the articles, and I tried to catch myself up, but it always read as if it was a continuation of a story, and there was no like a brief sort of context given at the beginning of it,
or history, maybe.
And then continue the story. So that's a little bit difficult, and that's what I was telling yesterday. Like, it seems, and some of the writing, it's just a little bit difficult for us to be engaged. And I'm not saying it has to be attractive or anything. I'm not saying it has to be fun. I'm not saying it has to please us, but it just has to be written well. And the level of education that is rising among young people so it's not like we can't read it. It's just like it's not being written well. So when that is the case, it could be a bit of a turn off for some people. Now, granted, I will say, as the younger generation, some of us, we have our issues where we want, we grew up in the instant gratification era, where we want everything right away all of the time. And that in itself is an issue. We do need to have a level of patience, but there is only so much patience that we have. And when there's simple things where article, context, continue the story, that sort of turns you off. When it's a sit and coming back to the whole thing of voting, promise no follow through, how can I trust you? It's very, very simple, right? And I think in this country, sometimes we make things harder for ourselves than we actually need to, than it actually needs to be. Because if it is that you're making a statement, this is what we're going to do, and then within the 5 years, or your term or your 2 terms or whatever, and it's not followed through, then how am I going to vote for you again, right? But then there are other factors, like maybe that's the only seat in that region, so you have no choice but to vote for that person. All right, maybe it's a matter of people thinking, okay, I'm going to vote for another party, but will my vote even matter? That's always a concern, especially among young people. Will my vote even matter? Because I feel like I'm just one person in a sea of people that's just going to go with what they're used to, with the hope that things are going to get better, right? And then when you grow up just sort of hearing that all politicians bad, regardless of who you vote for, then it's like, so then what's the point, you know?
Well, a couple things there. The first thing is, I know you would think that news should not be entertaining, and to some extent that's true, but it should still be engaging. And one of the things that bothered me with regards to some news articles is how it was structured. You would have a headline, then you would have a first sentence which basically repeats the headline. Then you'll have the first sentence in a proper paragraph which basically repeats the first sentence that was by itself under the headline. That's basically the second repetition, the third iteration of the same point. I at times have seen articles that do that. Basically, it's triple or double redundant, right? And then maybe in the second paragraph, after a headline, after a leading sentence, after an introductory paragraph, then the second paragraph, we actually get something new, the second bit of information, the second actual point or sentence in the whole story. So, and how blatant it was, where it was near copy and paste. That was how close the phrasing, the context it didn't offer. It was poor writing, because at some time I'll just be annoyed by it. And that's the thing, news should be engaging, not necessarily entertaining, but there's a difference between smiling and trying to be funny. You're not supposed to be funny, but you're supposed to maybe look pleasant, right? When it's time to be serious, look serious, but be engaging so that people could, you're trying to communicate to the wider population. You have to, as much as possible, make it as digestible as possible to as many people as possible. And I think, to some extent, that's maybe where our media landscape is not doing a good job. You still, and this is where the skill comes in, it still has to be done in an objective, unbiased manner, while still giving in context. But the context can't be opinion, right? It needs to be maybe past precedents or past information that will help the public formulate their own opinion. To me, that's what journalism would be. You put the information out there and you structure it in a way that makes it clear, easily digestible, and you will, of course, put the context later on, because unfortunately you do want to put the most important new stuff to the forefront so people could see, okay, what is the news in this situation, right? So part of it, to some extent, is in some cases, if young people don't have experience and not read through the whole article, a lot of people don't read through the whole article. You know, clickbait headlines we have that online as well. But therein leads to the next point that I wanted to ask you, because part of current events and really understanding political issues is to actually thoroughly be engaged in whatever the topic is, not to just, okay, what's the headlines and just go with that. Too many people do that. Too many people in the instant gratification generation, seemingly online, do that. But adults do it too, right? You know, adults don't necessarily navigate social media any better than young people, sometimes even worse. One of the things that I have yet to hear about in TNT, outside of maybe youth parliamentarians, is, do young people actually come together to talk about political issues beyond the level that you would see maybe in the rum shops, where, you know, it is who's to blame and who corrupt and the bacchanal and the bobble, but rather to talk about the issues themselves and what they would like to say about the issues. And I suspect I know what the answer is, because I don't really see that in the way that I would hope it would be coming from adults, much so. Why am I expecting that of the young people?
Yeah, so on the point of just sort of engaging, I think
just to discuss things amongst each other, not even to anybody else, but like, you know, in their social groups, to have serious discussions about whatever various issues that bother them.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't want to say I don't see that, but I think that comes after a certain age, when there are certain things that you have no choice but to worry about, right? I would say, when you're in your early, I would say even for me, when you're in your early 20s, like that's not something that the average young adult would think about, because they're not, you know, things are still being paid for them. They're still being driven around to an extent. They're still linemen, and they're still, I don't know, yeah, 1 year, 2 degrees, that sort of thing. But when you get, what I've seen, when you kind of have to make certain real world decisions, getting a job, right? If you want to become a teacher, all of that process of applying for your teacher's number, getting the interview, and then having to be placed wherever they place you. You know, I know somebody who lives in the West, and they teach far down south, right? And that's just the reality of it. You know, people don't know how to face those things. Well, they don't know to face those things yet until it's time. When you want to start your own business, if you are, especially in the creative sector, when you're either acting as a sole trader or an LLC, a limited liability company, the registration process, how taxing that could be, and then you realize, oh, this system kind of is a little bit difficult. Now, granted, it has made some improvements. A lot more things can be done online, right, in terms of registration and whatever, and dealing with legal affairs, but it could still be quite a process sometimes. You know, so a lot of it has to do with what the young person's experience is at the time. If they are part of a family that is a lot more politically engaged, or has these discussions in a manner well enough that the young person can digest, sometimes even join in the conversation and leave with some sort of lessons or something like that, then yes, they learn that at an early age. But when you do not have these sort of real world experiences, then you don't know what needs to be fixed. So you don't know what's broken, so you don't know what needs to be fixed, and then you don't know what works, and then you don't know how it works and why it works like that. You just hear. So when before you engage in that sort of real world, you're just hearing people complain. So then you're growing up thinking, oh, no government is perfect. No political party is great, so it doesn't even matter if I vote. And then when you have to engage in these activities, you're like, something has to be done, because this system makes no sense, this way of doing things makes no sense, and then you engage. But that tends to happen at a much later stage for the average young, I would say for the average young person, maybe post 25, 26, that sort of thing, right? And so that's a little, that in terms of their engagement, and then those conversations with each other happen at that age, on that level, because they're all kind of going through the same thing, right? And then they're all sort of being informed together. So I'm saying all that to say, I think that might happen later down, later 20s, early 30s.
Well, I'll just close by saying the not knowing how and why something works, that's something that plagues adults, older adults, not just young adults and young people. And when you don't know how and why something works, you just try and copy and paste, and then you wonder, why did it fail this time? I have no idea. That is a reoccurring issue, folks, in the private and public sector, but we have to end the conversation here to some extent. Do we still have the caller? Because while we have Diego Martin on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean, and to your co-host there. I always forget his name.
Good morning.
And I apologize. I Yeah, I want to dive in. So the issue you're all talking about, the quality of the writing on the current Prime Minister. I want you all to look closely at those writings. First of all, the newspaper. The newspaper was a daily. It was deliberately cut out. So the journalist's name wasn't put at the bottom of it. So somebody had been keeping that for the longest while to buzz the mark at a convenient time. You have to see the ownership of that newspaper now and where it has translated to. I'm leaving that for journalists to investigate who are the current ownership, where that newspaper, it is changed ownership, who was previous editor, who was managers inside there. It will be amazing for you all to see who that. At that point in time, none of the big newspapers covered the story. So it took a weekly to cover it. Even Short Pants, who was a dean in his school, he doesn't want to talk now because we know where his allegiance lies. It is time now for the big newspaper to do the investigative journalism on it and to break open the story, because a current seasoned journalist, Lizana Liebert, has done a video on it, and he have given more information. And this is what he said. He said he was in the class with the gentleman who was bullied for 5 years, from Form 1, Form 2, Form 3, Form 4, by the current man in the office. He has also said the guy, Imran, and himself were high performers that got themselves through the high marks to enter CIC. Whereas he didn't say the other party was the allotted 10% to get in. So that is where you all have to come in, journalists, to find out, flesh it out. It is a critical thing. And why has he not want to directly apologize to the person who said he was being bullied? That is as simple. That tells me you have heart. That tells me you have testicles. You do something wrong, admit it and move on. It will be better for him, because it might be have more under the carpet. Just listen to how he evaded it and deflecting. I have a sense there is more, and it is more to other sort of behavior, and I don't want to describe what sort of behavior it might be. But let me jump something more important I want to talk about. I'm seeing the current Prime Minister meeting with education people, the Concordat people, the institution. He's walking in Tinopuna. You know where I want him to walk? I want him to walk in his playground where he said Lal Bihari Street in Spinal, in that surrounding. And he will see 3 institutions in close proximity. The Debe campus that has been neglected for 10 years, the Parvati Hindu School, and the Shiva Boys Hindu School. 2 huge, modern, potentially modern, if it was finished, for a school institution for South. Those 3 institutions, you know what they would have done to Trinidad if they were instituted now? The south of the Caroni Bridge would have become the intellectual capital of Trinidad and Tobago. Those schools, I think is 180 million each, had everything you consider to be a small university for children. And that takes me back to the Tunapuna Hindi School, one of the best built primary school that covers everything, Vapa, Sapa, sports, everything. Swimming pool, cricket place, running court and things like that. It's a small university. I'll go on. Have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. With regards to your last point, all I'll say is I don't know to what extent our budgetary limitations and the fact that I think we have bigger problems with the education system systemically that is greater than the poor maintenance of or implementation of any single institution. That said, depending on how those facilities are not necessarily being utilized properly, that's still an issue. but I can't necessarily speak to that. With regards to the first point, Mark, I think what Nicola was trying to say is one of the weekly papers, I believe it was the Mirror, broke the story, and that could be part of the reason why the daily papers were not necessarily going in on all the detail, right? But it comes now to, I don't know if you're aware, but Minister Young has communicated on the situation twice. Yesterday, he kind of spoke, he danced around it, he really didn't address it. Today, he apologized to all bullies. He didn't necessarily speak to the situation directly, except to say that it happened so long ago, and words, I'm paraphrasing here, words to imply that, you know, it's difficult to bring it to a resolution. My thing is, I can understand why he doesn't apologize, because personally, I would imagine, unless he has evidence, which given the fact that we're talking over 30 years ago, all we have is eyewitness accounts. Unless he has objective evidence, any action he takes, whether it's an apology or a defense, is probably going to seem negative. And the caller is saying, well, he didn't defend himself. He didn't, you know, he is trying to not speak on the subject. Even if he tries to defend himself, I don't think it's going to go down very well. So then you get into this quasi-state where you kind of just, you don't really bring the situation to a resolution, and you kind of say nice words about the situation and you hope that it goes away, because at this point it's a he said, she said, right? Granted, apparently there are quite a few people throwing accusations against the Prime Minister, but since I don't necessarily have evidence from their side, it's difficult for me to definitely say they're right, he's wrong, and we should judge him for it in a final conclusion. What do you think about that? Because this might be something that, maybe from your perspective, on the other side, being closer to school age than I am. Well, hold on that point, I'm sorry. We have St. Anne's on the line. Good morning, caller, you're on air.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for taking my call, Sean. And good morning to your guest as well. I have to say this. It's often said that there's a special place in hell reserved for lawyers, and Mr. Young's behavior in handling this bullying allegation is proof as to why people say that. He could have simply cleared the air, and I suspect the reason why he didn't is because at the time of the incident, he may have misrepresented his complicity in the attack. I'm not to say that the gentleman who attacked him didn't deserve what he got, but provocation is a thing that a lot of Trinidadians understand culturally. We take it to heart. It's actually in our laws, as you're aware. And had he represented the true scenario, there may have been a different outcome for that young man who was expelled from CIC. I wish he could have taken the matter in hand and been sincere and honest instead of doing the loyalty thing where you use words and at the end of a sentence people still don't know what the hell you're talking about or where you're coming from, because you're trying to make a mass out of a simple thing. It's unfortunate that he's using it the way he's using it. And of course, nobody wants the thing to stick, so they want it to be gone quickly from the headlines so they could move on to what they consider more important. This is telling us something about the man's character. It goes back to the Zami thing. Yeah. It's saying something about your character in fundamental ways. And as for Mr. Young, let me say this, in case you aren't aware, this is how this election is going to play out. The PNM will probably lose the election. Mr. Young will do something in this country that is very rare, which is resign from a political party after you've lost the election, unlike Ms. Campbell, etc. And he'll go right back to private sector and enjoy his life and give it up to either Penelope or whoever else wants to take over the party at that point. I have no doubt that Mr. Young is not in this for the long haul. I do not see it. It's not practical to me, the way they usher him into the chair without having a proper convention. All of these things negate his authority within the party. And people want to say it's not a question of race. I'm sorry, in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of what goes down is about race. And trying to pretend it doesn't have a bearing on our politics, our cultural life, our day-to-day living, is to dig your head in the sand and pretend that, hey, we're living in fantasy land. I happen to live in the electoral district that Mr. Young represents in the parliament, okay? If I happen to support any opposing party, my vote is wasted. If I were living in Caroni and I supported the PNM, my vote is wasted. The only place my vote matters in an election in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of getting all parties to actually get me into gear, to get me interested to vote for either one or all of them, is in the marginals. That's where the vote matters. I don't live in a marginal district, unfortunately. But for those people who do, they are the ones who will have this election in hand. And I wish them Godspeed, because they will determine who becomes the next governor. But I really don't have a lot of hope for this PNM under Mr. Young. I think the way he was ushered into the prime ministerial position was, at best, a fait accompli that didn't spark any democratic traditions in my head. And I think he's going to pay a price for that. That's it.
Thank you, caller. If the alternatives were on a better footing, I would agree with you. But we're in that weird spot where I can't necessarily say that. But on principle, I do agree with you. It doesn't look good. I'll refrain from making a comment on that. Mark, well, we have Trin-City on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. Good discussion you're all having there. Sean, good discussion with your co-host. Ah boy, as the day goes, I just go into the wider discussion you all had. Not too much on Stuart Young because I stand for the cause, right? So the wider discussion hinges on wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in terms of what the political culture of the country is, right? When a country is newly independent, you decide on what you're going to do. If governance and good governance is your mantra, you have to start from day one with good governance and you improve it along the way. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore, good governance. Who could say what? So in Singapore, good governance is the norm. In Trinidad, poor governance is the norm, right? In Trinidad, we started off with governance after independence, which is an independent movement, and it went on to poor governance because a certain ethnic sector of society wants to retain power. That is from 1956 to now. That has been the mantra. We have seen that demonstrated in so many ways over the years. Now, the difficulty parents have in terms of communicating governance, wisdom, and understanding to their children is this. You're supporting our party with a skewed ideology, and the children see that in the open when they get together with friends, as your co-host said, with the family gatherings. But when you're dealing with work, and you're dealing with your children, and you're dealing with relatives in terms of doing the proper thing, have the proper thinking, then you switch over to good governance. So your poor ideology supports poor governance, but then there's an ideology that supports good governance in the home. It's a contradiction. So that is why we stuck in limbo, in flux, in a state of flux. So my advice to young people and young professionals like yourselves, do your job. Do a good job. Decide what your governance model is for yourself and your family and your workspace. And you function. Now, for me, it's a straight line. I have known the history of the People's National Movement. I'm not going down that road. Can't vote for them. Because, as the last caller said, everything hinges on race. Right? Everything hinges on race. From a primary school child to an adult, at almost 65, we know, everyone knows, that the PNM wants power for ethnic, so for a particular ethnic sector of the society to retain power, because as a former PNM minister said, all the other people have land, all they have business, all we have is political power. All we have, so that will keep things in the balance. Those are the facts. Young people have to decide where they're going, how they're moving going forward with their career, with their affiliations and with their associations. A little bit of the bullying. I understand how people feel about the bullying situation. And a bullying school always turns out to be a bullying adult life. Because I've asked some colleagues of mine about a certain person who not well, who I went to school with, and he's not very well, and so on and so on and so on, and they're not bothered. You know why? He was a bullying school. And watch me, we in the 60s. George is what, 40-something? I mean, young people. You understand? So how you were brought up in school and how you were taught to conduct yourself in school by your parents impacts on your adult life. All right? And that is where it is. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, choose a path of sound ideology, open your Bible, read your Bible, will choose a path of sound ideology, and you move forward on that. Many nuances, many stumbling blocks, many fires to out, many floods to clean up. A lot has to be done between now and when you retire in your twilight years. So just get on with the job and go with God. God bless you all. Take care.
Thank you, caller. Hi, Mark.
Highlight, yes.
I don't know if you remember the question that I asked before, like 2 callers ago. Any comment to make on any of it?
I do not remember your question, unfortunately. But what I would say is to the caller's last point about knowing the difference between good governance and bad governance. The thing is, it's not like we don't know. So when you enter into university and into some sort of higher learning, it's not like you don't know what the systems at work are. It's not like you don't learn the historical context of systems that work and systems that don't. The issue comes in with when you feel like you know one thing and your lived experience is something else, then it becomes a little bit of some conflict, because I know this to be true, but this is not what's happening.
Yeah.
Or some version of it is happening. And then you have to learn a little bit of then you have to learn the nuances of what version is happening, and then you feel like you are contorting yourself into different. And for those of us who are really, there's some people who can adjust really, really well, and there are some of us who take, and when I say take things personally, there are some of us who put our entire beings into what we do and to how we exist, whether it's work, whether it's family life, whether it's social circles, etc., etc. So I am one of those people. So when you feel like you're in a space, you know what it should be, or you know what good governance looks like, and then you're experiencing something that is a little bit skewed, then it feels like you're being inauthentic, and then that affects you in how you be in the space, right? So when you have things like that happening, other people are able to adjust well, but it doesn't make it any less bad, where you know it's and then we sort of back and forth. And then what are the conversations that we are having? We are having conversations about the tiny little nuances as opposed to the actual bigger picture of what it should be. We're arguing how we should navigate this bad situation as opposed to how can we fix this bad situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a call on the line. San Fernando,
Okay.
I think. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, caller. Go ahead.
Yes, brother. Morning to you, Keaton, and your host.
Morning, caller. Go ahead.
Let us be real and get serious, eh? You see this bullying thing with Mr. Stuart Young? Let us forget that. Let us study all who is owing us money in the treasury. Right? The Nasita Hall case, Section 34, the man was to talk to us about the Section 34, they gave him a pack of money, he hush him out, he ain't live long to enjoy it. He gone. Right? This is what the 2 major races should be on right now. We need an opposition to come in the parliament, fresh, new and young, Mikila, and whoever. Let us get the country on a good footing to run forward. These people went all over the world begging to bring people here to spend their money. The salt plant, Pitch Lake, be on that. Not be on no short, young and bullying some years ago. We not on that. The young children don't want to hear that. These firearms that these people bringing in Cuba and Central and El Chicora and up Sandy Grande where I born, be on that. That is there for the African people children because they don't want to go to school and learn nothing. One, they want to be on a corner all in El Chicora and somewhere by the market pushing. Right? Beyond that. Right? Who's speaking to all here right now is the Northern Range people. Right? The cocoa and coffee people. The Paiwari people. Paiwari is an Amerindian word. For something like bushram. Right? Be on seriousness.
We need a proper opposition in parliament. And then we could start to quarrel about things. We messed this country in for all those decades, kidi PNN, kidi UNC, kidi who. We need to get going forward for the young children. Our people don't want to come outside there and make money yet, you know, but I think now is the time for us to start paranging, you know. Yeah. So, brothers, let us be on a spiritual, straightforward head. The opposition must come out of that Red House. The people who owe in the treasury and the poor people children food money, pay it up. Man up, as Miss Kamala tell Mr. Rowley. Man up and pay back with money. We have plans for them. 8 or 7 of them, some of them still looking to fight election. Better they resign. Right? Brothers, be the great spirit with you all and be safe.
Thank you, Cole.
That was intense.
I mean, go ahead.
So, just a couple of things, Rick. I mean, he touched on a greater point, which is what are your policies?
Yeah.
Right? What are your policies? What are you doing for us? And how are those policies being communicated? And is it the media's job to communicate said policies? To have a segment in your media organization to say this is what they're doing, you know?
We have another caller. Just also the fact that, interesting, bigger issues, maybe, and a new opposition, a new third party, maybe, but that's oversimplifying. We can't get into it. We have San Fernando. Last caller for the morning. Good morning, caller. You're on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Michael Peter. You know, if you listen to all the previous callers, this is what the young people are up against. All the noise that surrounds them, especially in this, what they call, some people refer to as silly season. Let me see, when my first election, John, I voted in 1986. And I voted for the NAR. And my mother didn't speak to me for a couple of weeks. And because she was upset. And it was because I was one of those persons that as I grew up, I read a lot of papers because we were privy to in a household where you had information coming in. And I made a decision based on the information that I had at the time. So, and I hope the young people, well, it's one of the problems I have with young people now, because I don't think they absorb the information that they have, or they in another sphere, another world, and they don't really act around with what's happening. And I'm saying that based on my young people. I have a few of them, and I don't see, even though I try to let them understand in terms of the news and see what's happening around you, and try and engage in conversations. I think they're at the stage where, and Mr. Peter said it when he was talking about when they have to go and do certain things, when they, after this first year, second year, that kind of thing. And I think that is the stage of a lot of young people in this country, even in the 30s, in the early 30s, that they are divorced from what is happening in the country, and therefore they might just be in a situation where they might be influenced by parents rather than make a sound decision. And I do fault them for it, because I could understand the frustration. They can't get a job, they can't get the job that they want, they qualified, they can't, you know, there are a lot of things that preoccupy their space. So, but the thing is, it is all your time. A lot of what happens in this country in the future depends on the decisions that you all are going to make. And one of those decisions is a political decision that you will have to make, unfortunately for you all. It's a political decision. And the more you get engaged in the process, is the better the outcome for you all, because you all have to chart this course. And you are two of the examples that we need to have a little more of. A little more, Keaton as well, and Keaton is there. And I hope you all do your part in influencing your peers in terms of what decisions, in terms of not telling them what to do, but showing them this is what you should consider when you have to do what you have to do. Have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you, caller.
Thank you. Sean, 2 quick points.
Yes.
So one, he's right. It's not that we're not. I just want to expand on one of his points because he made a great point. It's not that we're not absorbing it. It's that we absorb things differently, and we absorb things in a way that changes very, very quickly, right? There are certain things that one particular generation would there are certain traits one particular generation would share with each other, and then another one, it will be slightly different. But because of how accelerated the world has changed, and how we access information and how we absorb information, it has moved beyond what the trend is, right? And granted, we are a little bit more aware of how we absorb information, but because of the wide gap, it's difficult for people to meet us where we are. So we've had to figure out a lot of mental things, a lot of cognitive things on our own, along with the help of people who have been certified in that. So you can get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The second point I want to make, yes, it is our time, but it has been my experience where I have been lucky enough to be surrounded by adults, older people who have encouraged me to do what needs to be done, right? To do what I want to do. But that I realized very quickly that is not the norm for a lot of people.
Yes.
And it's not the norm for a great number of people. Like I'll probably be the 1 in 5, right? And then when you meet other people like yourself, you meet other people like yourself much later in life, and then you're like, oh, yes, we are. And then when we have a close circle, then you realize, oh, our experience is a very rare one. So we try to be that for other young people as well. So when you don't have that, yes, it's our time. And then when you're growing up and you're in certain organizations and you're in certain positions, and you're like, I want to do this, I want to help, and then the older generation keeps you down.
Well, we have to wrap up really fast, so I just have a couple of quick things to make. One, with regards to the ever-changing ways how information is absorbed, one of the problems locally is our media industry, and to some extent it's pertinent to say the advertising industry hasn't really caught up to current media trends, and we're competing with foreign media. It is what it is. Then, here's the thing. One of the bigger issues about the Stuart Young bullying thing to me, Stuart Young was a teenager. Yes, he could have been a provocateur. He could have been one of the parties involved. Stuart Young didn't make the decision to expel the other students. And that is a separate issue that maybe is not being spoken about enough, right? How did that happen? And should that be a whole second debate that runs in parallel that has wider implications with regards to our education system and similar political implications? To the caller from St. Anne's, I suspect you're right. If the PNM loses, Stuart Young will probably be out to some extent. Maybe his political opponents within the party might have a part to play on that because he lost an election. And I've heard that he is not necessarily would have always been keen to be prime minister, but that's just rumor, so I can't substantiate that. The last thing I guess I want to say is this. They say youth is wasted on the young. In my experience now as someone who I would say I'm not that young, I'm not that old, I'm somewhere in the middle. Youth is wasted on the young, age is wasted on the old. Because youth have energy, age brings wisdom from experience, and I find that a lot of older people who should know better and have the experience, I do not see the improvement in judgment. Sometimes I see the judgment of a 20-year-old in a 50, 60, 70-year-old man's body, and I'm just left to wonder, where did we really go wrong in how we develop as a people? But to some extent, you see that abroad as well. Mark and Peter, thank you for joining me once again. It's been a pleasure.
Not a problem. It was great. It was great being up so early.
Yes, all your creatives like to go to bed late. So do I, but you know, I still do it. Come on, man.
You have a job to do.
I'm old. You're young. You know, no excuses. Folks, thanks to all the callers.
You young too, according to our caller from Trinity. You young too.
It's all relative. I'm much older than you. Thanks to all the callers for calling in this morning and contributing to the various conversations. Just like to say to close out the show, as always, make today and this weekend a good one. Like Mr. San Fernando apparently is going to already have, based on this conversation. I appreciate that, Mr. San Fernando. And remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe out there. And it's nice to be nice. If we were a little bit nicer, maybe there'll be a little bit less bullying. And we won't have some of these problems. We will see each other next week. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution.